have adopted the agenda. We are on item 4A, which is a public hearing for District of Squamish zoning bylaw 2011 amendment bylaw 39773 and 39777 Government Road, number 2464, 2016. I will read the opening statement for the public hearing. This is a public hearing. This public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act, to allow the public to make representations to council respecting matters contained in the proposed District of Squamish zoning bylaw 2011 amendment bylaw 39773 and 39777 Government Road, number 2464, 2016. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Members of council may ask questions following the presentations. However, the function of council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the planning department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet, shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or action of members of council or any other person addressing council. I now call on the planning department to introduce the bylaws.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the community. My name is Elaine Naseby and I am a planner with Development Services. Tonight's public hearing is for a rezoning application made by Daewoo Developer for 39773 and 39777 Government Road. This bylaw 2464 proposes to rezone two RS2 zoned lots in the North Yards neighborhood to RM2 to accommodate a proposed townhouse development. Previous motions related to this bylaw, first and second reading, were given on November 15th and December 6th of last year. Items that were to be provided before tonight's public hearing was a traffic impact study which has been received. And then subject to public hearing and third reading, conditions for adoption of this bylaw are a land development agreement to secure voluntary community amenity contribution, as well as statutory pedestrian right-of-ways, a housing agreement for 6 rental units, a flood covenant registered on title, a potential environmental covenant registered on title, as well as a noise and vibration covenant. And that last item was overlooked at first and second reading, but is shown on the screen. The proposed development is located in the center of Squamish, central to the North Yards neighborhood, between Edgewater Drive and No Name Road, adjacent to the recently approved Breeze development. The existing 2 lots would be combined to a total site area of 2 acres. And the site is located along a central bus route in relative proximity to Brennan Park and close to trails. The map on the screen shows the existing zoning, so the yellow parcels are the subject parcels. To the north is the Edgewater development, which is townhouse zoning. To the west is the recently approved Breeze, which is also townhouse zoning. Immediately to the east is RS2 zone, which allows for duplexes as well as single family. And then in the larger surrounding neighborhood, there are some, an apartment building to the south, Riverstones, as well as some mobile home development. The summary for this short presentation is the overview of the bylaw, the rezoning to RM2, summary of voluntary community amenity contribution, technical information including the traffic impact study, an overview of policy related to this bylaw, the development permit stage, which will come after this rezoning, and public comments that have been received. So the bylaw rezoning to RM2 would allow for a number of uses including duplex, townhouse, lodging and rooming house, childcare facility residential, as well as home occupation office. The zone's maximum height is 35 feet. Density for RM2 is 0.8. Lot coverage, 40%. The setbacks are as they are on the screen, and the parking requirements are in the zoning bylaw. Voluntary community amenity contribution for this project. The proponent has offered to meet the district's interim voluntary CAC target of $6 per square feet, which will roughly be $357,000. The exact amount will be determined at time of development permit. The table on the screen shows the allocation of those funds per the district's policy. The proponent has also offered 6 units of market rental that will be secured via housing agreement for 60 years or the life of the building. Servicing. So at first and second reading, this information was provided. I'm bringing it forward tonight for the benefit of those in the public who may not have been here. So the servicing, there is insufficient fire flow identified in this area, and it was also identified for the Breeze development. So if the Breeze development goes forward, it's likely that this development would pay a latecomer fee to those water services. This proposal before us tonight is proposing to include a bus shelter and a bus lay-by, as there is an existing bus stop in front of this development. The proposal does include pedestrian statutory right-of-way on a proposed internal road for this development, as well as some access to surrounding parcels, with the intention for there to be public access on this property, specifically to allow for neighborhood connectivity. Environment, we have received a site bioinventory that has identified environmentally valuable resources on site, which primarily include an old Sitka spruce tree as well. There's also 3 wildlife trees and potential use of some vacant buildings on site. The traffic impact study that we have received studied traffic volumes on the adjacent roads. The increase in the traffic volumes at the peak period, so the morning and the afternoon rush hour, are well within the acceptable levels of service for the surrounding examined roads and intersections. And the study recommended that no transportation improvements are required. It did identify, in terms of active transportation, that there are existing bike lanes on both sides of Government Road, and that a number of transit routes do pass by the property. The proposed bylaw amendment does align with official community plan principles of housing diversity and responsible provision of services. The sort of initial site plan that has been provided has a mix of housing. It's got traditional townhouse form in the back, as well as a stacked townhouse along Government Road. And so sort of the infill development that maximizes existing infrastructure, increasing the need for transit and such as in our OCP. It's in proximity to the Breeze's recently approved commercial, which will form hopefully a bit of a community node there. And so in terms of specific OCP policies, there's 3 on the screen here. The first relating to the infill development, reflecting the characteristics of the surrounding neighborhood. Staff feels that townhouse development on this site is appropriate given the surrounding multifamily zoning. The second OCP policy speaks to the development of complete communities, further mentioning concentrating local commercial, recreational amenities or other compatible uses to achieve identifiable neighborhood center and sense of community. So this does call for multi-use development in this sort of location, or it speaks to further than housing, just to have other uses in this area. And the last OCP policy speaks to what some of those other uses might include. At first reading of this bylaw, there was discussion of the north yards being deficient in park space. So following the rezoning stage will be the development permit stage. The proponent has offered an initial site plan for this project to include 51 townhomes, 23 at the rear of the site, and 28 at the front. There has also been discussion of some proposed variances that might be in line with some of the recently approved adjacent development breeze variances, and similarly those will be dealt with at time of development permit. Public notification, as there was not more than 10 requests for a public information meeting, one was not required. The public hearing was advertised in the December 29th and January 5th newspapers, and public hearing notices were sent to all property owners and tenants within 100 meters. We have received some public comments, and I'll give a quick summary here. Concerns include the amount of proposed density, the need for neighborhood amenities in this area, the concern that the rental offering might be too low, the need to secure affordable housing rather than market rental housing, concern about the road traffic, increase in parking. This was specific to Edgewater Drive and No Name Road, with existing parking concerns on those roads. Privacy concerns, specifically with the Edgewater development and behind the location of the proposed Strata Road, loops around the back, and another request to maintain mature evergreen trees that are at the north end of the subject parcels. Also a request for a crosswalk. So the staff recommendation at this point, because it's a public hearing, is the staff report was for council's information, and an alternative to the staff recommendation would be to also give consideration of third reading tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll entertain some questions from council at this point. I'll kick it up. I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail about the traffic study for the public and for council, and how it is assessed and integrated with the breeze traffic study.
The traffic study, Mayor Heinzman, through you, the traffic study did take into consideration the increased traffic that will arise out of the breeze development. And specifically, the traffic impact study was a 5-hour sort of observation period of the amount of traffic in the area. It found that it determined that there would be an increase in 23 vehicles during the morning peak hour as a result of this development, and that's between 8 and 9 in the morning. 27 vehicles during the evening from 4:30 to 5:30. It also noted 7 pedestrians on the street during the 5-hour study period.
And how the cumulative impact of the breeze and this?
So the traffic impact study was reviewed by our engineering department, and they said that it was well within acceptable levels of service. So it will, even with these 2 developments, the level of service is considered at a grade A or B at the surrounding intersections, and that's a measure of how long it will take somebody to turn at an intersection. And it's not until it gets to a grade D or E that it is a concern for changes or upgrades.
Okay, questions, council?
We touched on the environmental factors, and the mature trees at the back. Are those being safe, or are they being cut down?
At this point in time, on the schematic site plan, they're proposed, as far as I understand, to be removed. We do have some language in the zoning bylaw that speaks to tree preservation, but it allows discretion for when trees are within the footprint of a development.
What some of the concerns expressed were about privacy, and those trees do a good job of creating a natural divide between the Edgewater development and this one.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if there's any way to protect some of that natural screening that already exists.
Mayor Heinzman, through you, we haven't specifically considered what those measures would be unless my director can speak to that, but you know, one way would be through some sort of an environmental covenant, or maybe we would require their site bioinventory to further study whether those would be good trees for retention. It did not actually, identify those trees as an environmentally valuable resource beyond that one old Sitka spruce tree. But that's not to say that they shouldn't be retained.
No, I think the neighbors are arguing that it's a socially, so it's not so much the environmental piece, it's
Right.
about preserving a sense of separation. I know we're trying to have integrated neighborhoods with pedestrian access, but you also want to have a sense that you are separate from your neighbors, and they're not peering in your back window while you're dining. So that's what I'm wondering, is if there is a road going there, so are we sacrificing natural screening on a really wide road?
Right, Mayor Heinzman, through you, at this time, because we're at the rezoning stage and not the development permit stage, we haven't, you know, gotten to the detailed site layout approval, but
If I may, saving some of those trees at the back of the property would likely impact the density, which is a legitimate concern from the neighborhood. And so if council wishes, that is something that we can include as a condition prior to third reading.
Any questions, Councilor?
And so as I see in the package, correct me if I'm wrong, all of the variances, including parking, open space, height, and setback are all still relevant in order to achieve the 72.
And they would be part of the development permit,
Yes.
not part of the rezoning application. Councilor Rayson and Councilor.
So I noticed on the proposed development plan that's included in my package, the setback at the backyard and the side yards is substantially road as opposed to any other landscaping. Is that consistent with our zoning bylaw? Does the zoning bylaw allow that?
Mayor Heinzman, through you, yes, you can have roads within side yard setbacks, and on a multifamily development, there is a requirement for open space, which they are proposing to include in the middle of the development, and this site plan would require a minor variance to the open space area, as far as I understand.
It is slightly less than what the bylaw requires?
That's right.
Any more questions?
So just for, I do have another question, but just for the public's clarity, even if we approve the rezoning, that doesn't mean we've approved the density. So that's been requested.
Mayor Heinzman, through you, approving the RM2 zoning approves a 0.8 FAR density with all the zoning bylaw requirements. So,
However, if the variances aren't given in the DP, it may reduce the amount of units, theoretically. Just for clarity, because I know that the public's here, they may want to speak, and I think it's important for them to understand that council can approve the rezoning tonight. That doesn't mean that council's approved all the variances and the density that's been proposed.
right, and Mayor Heinzman, through you, this site plan on the screen proposes 51 townhouses and would require some variances to allow that number. Staff has not done the math to determine how many units they could fit in within the standard RM2 zone regulations.
My question was about the traffic study. Does it look at anything besides intersection volumes? in terms of turn-ins and turnouts from developments, and also the fact that there are 2 school bus stops between No Name Road and where Government Road intersects Queens Way during the morning rush and during the afternoon drop-off. And so with this amount of cars, do traffic studies and contemplate those sorts of things? People stopping to wait to turn left into their development, or not at an intersection, but in the middle of the
Mayor Heinzman, through you, I don't know specifically whether it looked at sort of the school bus stoppings and all that, but actually I don't think I have the whole entire study here, but the final recommendations do include some recommendations specific to the turning in and out from this development. They're not top of mind, though.
The answer, yeah, it hasn't contemplated school bus stops. No, the answer is no.
Not as far as I'm aware.
Councillor Reyes.
Thank you. And going back to this, if you could put the previous slide back up again. That one. So going back to this setback issue, I mean, this, as Councillor Elliott points out, is a zoning discussion tonight, approving land use. But if we were concerned about things like screening and landscaping, that is the subject of the development permit. And for example, the issue about the screening at the back of the lot, which is the top of the picture, is a development permit issue.
Mayor Heinzman, through you, yes, it is.
I think I understood that. It was more for the public clarity. Thank you.
It is a development permit issue unless council wanted to secure something that's already existing on the site, such as existing vegetation. With a development permit process, you're essentially starting from scratch. It's not an environmentally sensitive area, and so the DP will only speak to formal character. So we'll only speak to new plantings and a new vegetation plan. And this site plan does incorporate some vegetation at the back of the property for buffering, but it is it's likely going to take some time for it to be established.
Could you estimate how much that is? Just from the diagram, it looks like the road goes practically to the edge of the property. Can you give us a number of feet that it might be separated from? Meters?
No, at this point it's a conceptual site plan. It's not a development permit application yet.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about the front edge, if there's active transportation going across, if there is a sidewalk from one end to the other. It doesn't look like there's enough room on the plans provided.
Mayor Heinzman, through you, that is the intention. And I understand that the adjacent development, the Breeze, I think that they are potentially installing a sidewalk along that whole block. And then if that's the case, this would be a latecomer for this development.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff before I go to the public? I don't see any. Doesn't mean there's not an opportunity for council to ask questions later, but I have a list in front of me of about 5 names, and I have first up Chessie Knight and on deck Rob Crowder. Come up to the podium, state your name and your street address, and if you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
Hi, my name is Chessie Knight. I live at 39754, number 7 Government Road. That's Maple Tree Court. We're on one side, or Arborwoods on one side, and Mountain View Manor on the other side. And I understand very much council's limitations in a public hearing, in that we're only here to discuss the rezoning of one parcel. In this case, it's 2. I guess it's like a lot consolidation. But from a neighborhood resident perspective, with all of these new developments going in, we have Breeze, we had Elements Phase 2, we had Riverstones. I don't even know what this new one's called. I walk by the sign all the time, and it's called, Braggable, so that's what I've started calling it, but I think it's Target Developments. But anyway, it's very difficult for myself, as a resident of that neighborhood, to be able to put on my blinders and look at this in total isolation even to the point of having to look in isolation to what Council Race brought up, which was, we are here tonight to discuss the rezoning. We're not even here tonight to discuss the development permit, and I know the difference between those two. And the potential problem I see there is that, yes, if the developer got this rezoning, the potential exists to put pressure on council and staff to allow all the density, or the project becomes non-viable, or at least that might be the argument. But we're not really allowed to have that conversation here tonight because we're just discussing the rezoning.
I'll just clarify that. I think council wants to hear the public's concerns, issues in its totality.
Oh, okay.
We're just not actually making the decision about the variances today and the issues, but we're happy to hear them.
Awesome.
Because they all are connected.
Okay. And I know as soon as somebody says, I'm not NIMBY about this, that's usually a trigger that they're kind of NIMBY about this. So my prelude to the next thing I'm going to say is I'm really not opposed to more development in my neighborhood. It's inevitable. B, people deserve a place to live. I don't have a problem with it. What I have a problem with is at what point within a certain physical area are you maxed out? My number one concern right now is traffic. I don't know, I'm not an expert in traffic studies. So, but to me, I'm in the sciences, and if you said we did a traffic study, we looked at traffic for 5 hours on one day, we looked at the number of pedestrians, the number of cars at peak, morning and evening rush hour. I hope they looked a little more than that, because that to me is statistically an irrelevant sample for what's really happening in that neighborhood on a day-to-day, on a season-to-season basis. And I can tell you, I've only lived in my unit since 2008, how much busier that street is. And I'm not even here to say it shouldn't be busier. I'm here to say there's got to be a better way to communicate to the public. If there really is no, or what was the words that you guys used from engineering, was that the increased volume would be at an acceptable level. And my question is, well, then acceptable by acceptable to whom? And I would like to see something quantitative around what is considered acceptable. It's one idea to have an area of expertise like engineering and traffic study and say, we deem this to be the acceptable level, and to be a resident of that neighborhood and say, you know what, guys, I think it's already approaching unacceptable. That's my personal comment living in the neighborhood. And then the last comment I have with respect to increased density, most of you folks know I'm a biologist. I am a biologist. I support in principle a lot of the ideas behind increased density, but what I often don't see in developments, and I'm not just picking on Squamish and I'm not just picking on this development, this is food for thought for all of us, is that we get the first part of the increased density, more units, but in a true biological and environmental sustainability respect, if you're going to put more people in a people per same unit area, we should be seeing more parks and more environmental green space. And we don't typically get that with these types of developments. So I read through these comments tonight. I don't really think I have anything to add beyond what I've just said here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up is Rob Proudfoot, and on deck is Peter Marshall.
Hello, my name is Rob Proudfoot. I live at number 3, 1200 Edgewater Drive. My unit isn't directly affected by the new development, but I'm in the townhouses that are adjacent to the development. I agree with everything that she just said. I've also lived in the area since 2008, and there is a huge increase in traffic already, and parking is our other issue. We already see a lot of spillover into the side streets from people parking. I'm worried that none of these developments are coming with enough parking as the density got higher. With the bike lane on Government Road on both sides, there's going to be no parking available on Government Road. And there's so little already on Edgewater and No Name Road. So as the prices in Squamish went up, there's more vehicles per home. I know that we want to get away from that, but the reality is there's more people living in a lot of these townhouses. Adult children aren't leaving, they have vehicles to get themselves to work, as well as other people are leaving, like there's so many people commuting that they have vehicles of their own. So traffic, parking, and I would like to see the increase in the traffic study I would argue that there's a lot more cars than what were counted on the days in question, so maybe that we could look at that. And the developer one is looking at, and we're not here to talk about the development permit or the variances, but with the Breeze development, it was at the variance point that it looked like it was too late to discuss some of the stuff that was presented to council. So when we consider that, they got the decrease in the parking, which was minor to them, and a lot of us in the neighborhood didn't agree with, but also the overheight. I don't know if they're going to be going for that overheight variance, but that's also another one that was an issue. And the trees being left on site is a great idea. They can look at this point of some of that buffer not coming down. And, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Peter Marshall, and then on deck is Shoshana Bowen. Please state your name, your street address, and whether you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
Hi, good evening. My name is Peter Marshall. I represent myself. I'm 22 Edgewater, and I'm right on the corner of the property line. Basically dissects my balcony. So I think there's been a lot of really good points. I think Sue Stafford, who's a couple of doors down from me, has got a really good letter and should be taken to heart. I think a lot of the comments that I see from Warwick and Sue Stafford and some of the same old axe to grind, the parking issue. And it's really, it's not space as the final frontier, it's parking. At the end of the day, we're going to see a lot of issues around spillover parking, and Edgewater, no name, same axe to grind. It's already kind of hitting the 75% mark already. I don't see in these great plans, and everybody I've talked to in the neighborhood, I think everyone's in agreement that some development is what they were thinking that was going to happen. And I think they're all, pretty hip to the idea that some new stuff comes in and some development comes in. It's great. But I think that at the end of the day, it's the density and the overall impact to the neighborhood. And the parking, I think, is the big issue. That's when I look at these stalls that are in, say, for example, in the Breeze, they have a standardized stall of around 19 feet. Well, that's good for maybe a small car like my little Mazda 3 or maybe a Camry. But when you see most trucks at 20 feet and their bumpers are hanging over, a lot of people put their toys and they have snowmobiles and they have long lights. So we see a lot of the garages being filled up. Again, that's something that has been addressed in some of the other letters. And I think the issue is that the gates kind of gotten open with the Breeze, and now we're seeing this again. You're basically adding about 350 people into a neighborhood that originally had 5, admittedly very large residential lots. And based on the average of 2.7 people per household, where, say, 15 people just really might have lived, we have now 350 people. And they have their cars, they have their toys, they have their dogs, but they have needs for a park. And what I don't see in these general plans, especially what happens when one plan gets approved and the next one says, well, they got a lot of things through and that's great, I like it, we're going to go for this much more. So I guess at the end of the day, when you look at all these things getting planned one little piece at a time, I guess I got to ask you, where are the parks? Where's some of the balance to where are these people going to go? Where are they going to walk through? There's a lot of things around the parking, the dogs, the parks that I'm not seeing that should be probably better addressed in like an OCP type manner. But if you just keep adding one development against the other, I think in 10 years, you're probably going to wind up regretting some of the density. And it's going to take away from the value of the original people that perhaps were there. And I think that, you know, when Edgewater was being developed by Bob Fast, one of the things that he listened to, and remember that we lived there, we didn't develop it. One of the things, he listened to the neighborhood, and he had originally 50 units put in, and he backed it down to 36. So, I mean, I guess what I'd like to see for the developer here is maybe take some of this thing and their concept, and I think it's a great concept, and shrink it down a little. And I know that that's, you know, maybe it's not praising the almighty dollar as well, but I think that, you know, just like I would like to have seen with the Breeze, I'd like to have seen it shrunk back. I don't like to see the overheight. And then speaking about the Sitka spruce, that's, you know, I look onto, and some of the mature trees on the borderline. I guess my question is, they are suggesting that these trees will be saved, but the reality is, if they have to dig down the organics and then bring the soil back up to a certain height with stuff like river rock that drains better and you can compact and then build on top of, how is that going to affect the root structure of that Sitka spruce and some of the other trees that are along the property line with Breeze? I would suggest to you that that's going to be an awfully expensive Sitka spruce tree at the end of the day, considering its siting, what you're going to have to do with that U-shaped driveway, move townhouses out of the way, protect the root structure. So I think at the end of the day, we have to kind of sort of look at, you know, is this a real thing that they're proposing, and then it gets kind of removed at the last second? So I want to just leave you with those comments. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We have Shoshana Berman and then Michael Lyons, and that's the end of my list. So if you'd like to speak, just put your hand up, and I'll ask you to come to the podium, state your name, street address, and whether you represent yourself, the business or organization.
Hi, my name's Shoshana Berman. I currently live in Port Coquitlam, but I own Lot 9 from the Abbey Lane development, which is another Target Homes project that's currently being built. So a couple of things. I would like council to consider Breeze and Abbey Lane together for their density, in the sense that Target has 82 units over 4 lots, which is consistent. Because we have lower density single family homes there. They're developing them essentially at exactly the same time. Yes, the portion that is Breeze is higher density, but we are lower density in general than the rest of the properties around us. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to just say, well, Breeze had higher density, so this development gets higher density, because Target was also developing lower density at the same time. And for example, we have 4 parking spots. So a couple of things. The density is way too high. It just is, and it lends itself to all the other problems that everyone is discussing. It's about the density. If you lower the density, you mitigate all the other problems, the parking, the road, the green space. If you're looking at converting this neighborhood to essentially medium density residential, then you need the amenities that go along with medium density residential. As many other people have said, parks, crosswalks or a stoplight, something to deal with the traffic there, probably just a crosswalk for the children. You have another piece of land here that's just been developed. You also have a curve in the road that's a bit of a concern as far as safety for children. So I've advocated a crosswalk for now. I'd like to see that green space moved to the front of the development and made into public park, or an amount of money set aside in another area set aside for a park. I think the end of No Name Road may be Crown land, and there's the sort of de facto park there now, but it isn't, it hasn't been developed in the sense that it doesn't have proper playground equipment, et cetera, and a proper access to the dike. As far as privacy is concerned, I'm going to actually argue in the opposite direction of some people here for some things. I actually think we need to look at less privacy with regards to all of these developments should have public access thoroughfares, much like any other street, where when you're walking down the street, you see your neighbors, you can walk from one neighborhood to the next, nobody is stalking you. As someone who bought Unit 9, right on the end, right near the dike, I was fully expecting there to be public access to the dike at the end of my development, and I would not object to it. I would not object to people from Elements walking across to right in front of my house to come to the dike. I think that you build communities that way and you build neighborhoods instead of these sort of private property enclaves. I mean, what's next? Gated communities are next. I grew up in California. You don't want that. I mean, I think that whole we're private, don't come in here. It's our land. It's kind of, I'm not saying that's what people said here. I'm just saying that I think that as far as walking in thoroughfares, we want to build neighborhoods and communities. But as far as the trees go, I'll tell you, I own a yew hedge that I have no access to. That's entirely to the benefit now of the townhouses on No Name Road that I will pay taxes for. Maybe you can do something about that. And in 13 years, will actually adversely be possessed by the townhouses on No Name Road under Canadian law. And I had to pay for it. And that yew hedge was maintained, and it was maintained with proper drainage to keep it safe and to keep the townhouses there safe. So there shouldn't really be any reason why this development can't make sure that mature trees that are already there, even if they have to be to the benefit of Edgewater with drainage to this side of it and a fence, it should, I mean, it was done for our units. So I don't know why it couldn't be done for these other units, other than the density in the road there, right? But like I said, that privacy hedge has been maintained for No Name Road and the back of our land, which, like I said, our entire yard, which we privately own, it's not strata, it's bare land strata, we own it, but we can't use it. They use it. Yeah, I think the density needs to be lower, need more parks. As far as parking goes, just one thing to be cautious of. They all have 2 parking spaces, which is normal, but I can tell you I live in a brand new townhouse complex where there's a lot of guys who work with trucks, and we have a truck. And I think that most of us that bought there had no idea that our trucks wouldn't fit under the, I don't know how this is being built, but if they're being built with little patios above the driveways, you can't get trucks under there or vans. And we don't have stuff in our garage, but we can't park our van in our driveway. And it's not even the length of the driveway that's the problem. It's actually the height of the balcony. So it's just something to think about, not just how long those driveways are, but whether or not they have those balcony overhangs over them means you can't park worker vans in those driveways, and they have nowhere to go. And it's a huge problem in the development that I live in now. It doesn't matter if we have anything in our garage. You can't fit the cars and the trucks and the vans in the driveways or in anywhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I would like to see more rental housing. So if they're going to get increased density, I think it needs to come with something for the community, such as 25% rental is now standard and medium density in the Vancouver greater area. I don't see why Squamish wouldn't start requiring that. It's a fairly new regulation in Vancouver, 3, 4, 5 years, I don't know, not that long. But in both of the properties that I own now, 25% of the medium density is rental, and it has to be managed rental. And then I would argue that some of it should also be specialized rental, whether or not it's for disabilities or families or subsidized or record income, something like that. But specialized rental. Anyways, thank you for your consideration. I don't think that loopy road needs to happen. I think it's a bad idea. I didn't see that picture before. Thank you.
So I didn't hear the last comment.
I didn't see that picture before. I don't understand the need for all that roadway. I think that could be redone so that you don't have that much roadway. I think that's a really fair concern. And if they had, like in the what's the other townhouse complexes over here, downtown? They're in their 5th phase.
Eagle Winds.
Eagle Wind. In Eagle Wind, they have the backyards together, and I don't know, I just don't think, I think that site plan could be redone, so you don't need all that road. It seems excessive, personally. But
Thank you very much.
thank you. I didn't see that picture before.
Michael Lyons, and this passed last to my list on my sheets of paper. Pardon me, sheets of paper. If you do want to speak at the public hearing, just put your hand up and I'll ask you forward. Welcome.
Welcome, Mayor and Council. Michael Lyons, I'm at number 10, 1200 Edgewater Drive. It's good to see a couple of councillors to join in the conversation this time around who were not allowed to attend the last Breeze development and to be party to some of our neighbors' concerns. I don't think really there's that much more to add. I think I reiterate the points that we tried to bring forward the last time we were here. There is no one that ever spoke, and we had over 40 submissions, the highest number of submissions ever brought forward not against a development, but against the sheer density of the development ever before brought before in council. A number of people who were impassioned enough to come forward in front of you to speak, and were somewhat seemingly, we went away almost admonished, it seemed, for doing so. The very concerns that we brought forward are being brought forward again tonight. And I guess we come at it from a point of view of long-term Squamish residents who have watched our town grow, who recognize that development is inevitable, who recognize that there will be increased density, but spoke quite loudly about the sheer volume of density that was being put into an area. And now when we look at this and we add these two units together with the 51 units proposed, we now see 130 units, which is approximately 4 times the amount of housing that goes into the development that was right beside it. And yet when we look around at all the other townhouse complexes, Arborwoods, 36 units, Eaglewood, Edgewater, 36 units, Maple Tree, 20 units. Okay, sure, we have townhouses. But and I bring forward this, Mayor Heinzman, where even you, I think, had to admit, perhaps it was a bit much, even with the Breeze development. We were putting in perhaps too much. And I think that's where we are today. And I think that's what we're speaking to, and speaking from a point of view of Squamish residents who are saying, okay, we get the fact there was going to be increased development, but at what point are we increasing the density to the point where we, in fact, are almost fracturing the neighborhood? We're changing the entire character of the neighborhood. Sure, if they would have come forward with 40 units, perhaps. But now we're getting to the point where just how many units can we actually get in? I just caution our council in terms of looking at our developments. I wonder if the variances that are coming forward are the same ones that we saw at the Breeze, where we're going to see setbacks from government road, reduction of green space, changing our bylaws to increase the heights. Again, the bylaws were put in place to protect residents and to keep things, conformity, a certain amount of conformity and uniformity to that. And those seem to be going out the window. I just ask you to stop and to think about the direction we're going in, and just reconsider what's being asked of us here. It's not about keeping our own little neighborhood. It's about keeping the character of neighborhoods, keeping that green space, keeping those things like sitka spruces that eagles call out, you know, to us in the morning. I mean, those are the kind of things that we pay attention. That's what makes neighborhood, you know, we don't have a problem with people walking through. We don't have a problem with having extra people, but how many extra people? That's the point I'm trying to make. And I'll leave it at that. I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Please come up, state your name, your street address, and whether you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ray Richards. I live at 1200 Edgewater Drive. I'm representing myself. Just a couple of minor points that I'd like to bring up is, with regard to the parking study, as an engineer myself, I'm sort of concerned with regards to the limited, hour and time period that was studied at that point. So I'd be curious to understand whether that was a weekday, a working day, maybe a school holiday, and whether it's some sort of outlier that doesn't really represent a normal day in the area. The second thing would also be, is there such a thing as a parking study that could be conducted? I don't know the answer to that, but maybe someone that is aware and can comment. And really in closing, I think, all of the points have been brought up. My personal major concern is privacy. Our property is on the north end of the development, and in order to maintain that privacy, I feel once the development, the zoning has been approved, we're sort of at the mercy to some extent of the development and what goes on in this room in a few months or years. So what I'd like to see maybe at this stage is some sort of protection against that. Is it possible that the setback to the north end of the development is conditional on it being green space with at least some preservation of those trees? So if the zoning was approved based on that, I think I'd be a little bit more confident that the privacy would be maintained. So that's about all I've got to say.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Please come up, state your name, street address, and whether you represent yourself, business, or organization.
Hi there, my name is Sabrina Gawley. I live at 1918 York Avenue in Vancouver, and excuse me, I'm representing the developer. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone here for your commentary. Council, I think you might be able to agree that this is one of the most rational group of individuals I've heard speaking at a public hearing in a really long time. So thank you for your thoughtful commentary. I want to make everyone aware that this is a conceptual plan. I've been working with planning over the last 8 months to arrive at where we are today. Needless to say, that's been done independently of your input, and your input is necessary in achieving what we all want to achieve in this room, which is, I think there's a general understanding that development is going to happen, but it has to be in a way that's suitable for everyone in the neighborhood and everyone in this room. I'm going to attempt to respond to some of your inquiries. I want you to know that I'm accessible, so if there are any further questions, you can contact me at any point. I'm not going to hide behind planning or council. I want you to come directly to me because, like I said, your feedback is important. Parking is a huge concern, and I fully understand that. We have done several modifications to the site plan. We had a lot more tandem parking initially. I appeared at the Target open house. I also came to their public hearing, and I listened to that commentary, and we made changes to the original site plan to incorporate fewer tandem parking stalls and increase parking as much as possible. So as we work through refining this plan, I hear it loud and clear, parking is probably first and foremost here. Secondly, transportation and traffic study. I don't disagree that an extended study should potentially be done. I'm not a traffic expert, so I need to lean on my consultants and I need to lean on the district's engineering staff to make those recommendations. And we can discuss this, planning and myself, whether we think it's merited that we do an extended study so that we answer those questions that were brought up today. As far as privacy, we worked very hard, and like I said, we've gone through several site iterations here to maintain those trees. The unfortunate issue is that there's a considerable amount of fill that needs to go into the site, and we looked with environmental consultants and landscape engineers as to whether we could well those trees in order to preserve them, but then that became a liability for children playing around the trees as well. So as much as I'd like to say that we can keep the trees, it may not be a reality. That being said, happy during the development permit stage to include landscaping that creates that privacy screen that everyone is requesting right now. So just a consideration moving forward. Height. So in sitting at Target's public hearing, I heard that height was a variance that not everyone was happy about. It affected the privacy because they did have those rooftop patios overlooking neighbors. We initially had rooftop patios and have since eliminated those and reduced the height from what Target is building or will potentially be building. So our height is actually considerably lower than what was approved for Target. We haven't refined it. I can't give you what that number is today because we do have to work through this, but I can guarantee that the height will be less than what Target has proposed. Density. It's very interesting for me because I've done development in other municipalities also. Units really seems to be the big priority as opposed to what is referred to as FAR, which is floor area ratio. That typically defines density in a municipality, but I'm hearing from the public that it's more of a unit count situation. We actually have more units because we created small 600 square foot units to create more affordable housing options for the public. So if this is something that we need to take a look at and create bigger and fewer units, then that's something we can potentially do. That being said, our FAR, the allowable under an RM2 zoning, is 0.8. We're currently at 0.61. So we've reduced significantly from what allowable buildable is. And as a developer, I want to build and sell as much as possible, but we want to do it in a thoughtful way. And it wasn't thoughtful to cram 0.8 FAR onto this site. And that's why we're at 0.61. But again, if unit count is a big concern, then we have to weigh the pros and cons of whether affordable small unit housing is to the benefit of the district, or if this unit count is really such a perturbance to the public. Neighborhood amenities. A park would be great in this neighborhood. I think we all agree. Unfortunately, this site is too small to be the host for that park. It's too small to be a host for community amenity. So in lieu of providing an on-site community amenity aside from the bus lay-by, we are writing a check to the district in the sum of $357,000 to be confirmed based on the final density. That is to be for a local neighborhood amenity. So that's the best we can do, unless we can think of something else that's super creative. But our site, just because of the site, the size constraints, doesn't enable us to provide that on-site park. Rental housing came up also. Rental housing is an offering that we've provided in anticipation of the development permit, so they actually go hand in hand. The variances and the rental housing go hand in hand as an offset. So I think, yes, we want to provide rental housing. We're providing 6 up front with the understanding that when we get to the DP stage, that could change. But as it stands right now, it's an additional offering above our community amenity contribution. The loop road at the back, it's, again, interesting comments, and that's why I appreciate everyone being here. We did that because Target did it, because it created a buffer between the units to the north and the units on our site. So we were actually responding to what we thought the public wanted by creating that loop road. You can't make everyone happy. So again, that's a conversation that we can have with planning to see what are the merits of creating that buffer by way of a road, or do we want the backyards up against each other? So I believe that's all my points. Again, I'm available to anyone and happy to share contact information, and I thank everyone for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this public hearing? Please come up and state your name and your street address, and if you're going to present yourself, a business or an organization.
My name is Peter Marshall. I represent myself. It's 22 Edgewater, 1200 Edgewater. I just want to say that I'm supportive of the loop at the back of the piece of property. The And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that they really have only, on the left-hand side, that's where the bulk of the cars come in and out. And on the right-hand side, it's actually under bollards and green grass. So it's really an emergency only. So basically the orange townhouses, which you see at the back of the property, are the ones that are going to be driving around to and fro. And I think that that's actually an intelligent use of space. That said, the Sitka spruce, we can pretty well say it's gone because of the fact that you're going to have to dig out the infills, So I think that's one of the things that we should be really looking at is what's the level of plantings are they going to do to replace some of those green trees that are in between those two properties, namely 1200 Edgewater to the north, So I guess that's probably the thing that I want to really point out to people is that I think that Breeze actually did a good job of doing the U-shaped road to actually bring the townhouses away from the property line so you don't have a situation where bedrooms are looking into bedrooms back to back. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
There was a whole bunch of great comments raised, and I want staff to be able to respond to some of those. So I'm not closing up the public hearing at all, but if you do want to speak, just put your hand up, and I'll let you go up to the podium. But perhaps at this point, we could go to staff and can you speak to some of the issues that were raised by the people who presented at the public hearing? And on that, I would like you to just go over a little bit, because it is a bit of a complicated design, because some of the parking is underneath, and some of it's surface access to the garages. So just if you could sort of talk about how that traffic within the development and the parking within development is there as well, just so we understand it completely.
Mayor Heintzman, through you, as mentioned, we haven't studied the site plan in intimate detail as yet, but I believe that all of the red and orange townhouses are side-by-side carport parking, and the rationale with that is that if there's not a enclosed garage, then the thought is that people might be more likely to park their cars there rather than storing equipment. The units along the back, I believe, are enclosed, and so the proposal is meeting the zoning bylaw parking requirements. The stacked townhomes in the front, it is it's sort of an underground or an at-grade enclosed parking situation with units along the front, so giving sort of a nice street front on Government Road, and so the stacked townhomes will park underground.
Can you, I know this is more DP, but just, no, I won't get into that. Are there any other, there was a bunch of other things that were raised, including trees and all of that. I wonder if you could address them, and then Councillor Black and we'll pass out.
If I may, there was a few questions raised about the traffic impact study. So I just want to clarify that the traffic impact study was conducted on January 20th, which was Wednesday, 2016. And our engineering department has reviewed and worked with the consultants, and they definitely look for things like that in terms of what day of the week, what hour of the day it's being conducted. And they have satisfied the engineering department's requirements, so it's been accepted by the district as a legitimate traffic impact study, which does not recommend that any increase in the level of service is warranted, and it looks at a 10-year horizon, so it's not just for 2018 when this project is expected to come out. Parks has been mentioned, and staff have mentioned this in the previous reports that this neighborhood is deficient in park space, and it would be welcoming to see a development incorporate park as part of its layout. We haven't achieved that to date. Rental housing, this project proposes 10% of rental housing compared to its proposed density, but again, the density is limited by the zoning regulations. So right now, the conceptual plan takes some liberties with assumptions that if there will be variances approved. If those variances are not approved, the density will likely be minimized. The parking requirements of the zone and anywhere outside of downtown Squamish for a development like this, a standard would be 2 parking spots per unit, which is fairly generous from a parking perspective for a community of our nature and our size. And again, that question will come up at the development permit stage, whether a decrease in parking is valid in this proposal. Is there anything else you have?
I don't think so unless there's some specific questions.
Councilor Bucknell?
Do you have an idea on the timeline for the Pioneer Way extension into Government Road?
We do not have a timeline for that.
Yeah, because I think that would also help us understand, what the impacts are, because for the benefit of folks who may not know, I know that we have developed a DCC project that's going to be focused on development cost charges that will make it so that people who are going north-south on Government can continue straight through at Centennial rather than going through the North Yards neighborhood. And if that can be online, in the near future, then that will help to take some pressure off that section of the road. So, and I, as a council member, would be keen to see that happen.
Yeah, I just asked the CAO, because it is within our 5-year financial plan. I just can't remember what year it's scheduled for within the DCC bylaw. I'm going to go Ms. Cox.
Through council, it's actually scheduled for in the 2017 capital budget.
No, then we do.
For actual
That's not
construction?
approved yet, but yes, there's $1.17 million for the DCC Pioneer Way extension project.
My second question is, remind me, I don't know, we know the lot at the very end of No Name Road, that is the informal park at the moment. Is it BC Rail land or Crown land?
We believe that lot is Crown land.
It's Crown, but it's under lease to CN.
Yeah, because my observation being that that is a very logical place. Having lived in the neighborhood before, maybe there's some opportunity for us to approach the Crown and regularize that and put in the infrastructure. Because I agree, it is quite a distance to the nearest playground. There is one in the neighborhood, but it's on the other edge of the neighborhood. So.
Yeah, we did approach CN a couple of years ago, and we didn't get any traction, but something we can.
There is another option, which is the corner just before you get on the bridge, besides the Elements, and that's another piece of Crown land. And we have approached the province, and there is some potential to acquire that and put it to a park use.
It's just very small.
It is very
Doesn't meet
small.
our
It's a
part
busy
right
intersection. It's not a pleasant of a place.
Yeah, I'll go back and look in 2 seconds, just trying to get some question answers so we don't repeat ourselves too much. And we do own the lands, of course, where the Pioneer Road, other pieces of lands in that area too that would be part of the consideration. Any other comments and questions that were made at the public hearing that we can answer or give some clarity to? Or did we cover it all?
I think we have.
So I'll go back out to the public. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? I had the woman behind you before, and then I'll go to, yeah, come on up. Again, same old thing, get your name and street address.
My name is Shoshana Berman. I, number 9, Abbey Lane, I'm sorry. Oh, right.
In the Breeze development, yeah.
No, not Breeze, no, not Breeze. The single family detached.
Okay.
Sorry. I was just wondering about this piece of green space here that was just sold. It's in the bottom right of that picture there where the old road is. Is that what you just referenced?
Yeah, maybe you could put your cursor on it.
Mayor Heinzman, through you, we were just speaking about...
I know what you were speaking about, but I think she was asking what I was speaking about.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yes, That's-
in
yes.
that area.
Yes.
We own not the lot that the cursor was on, but the other two roadways we own.
Yeah, because there's an old road in there, right?
There's,
So,
I think in theory too, but yeah.
so I assume someone just bought a big piece of land in there, so I assume it's probably for development. Could a park go in there someday?
Something we can
That's a
consider.
big,
So, as was mentioned earlier, there is a DCC project, road project on the capital plan proposed budget this year, hasn't been approved yet, that would extend Pioneer Way up to Government Road. Maybe you could just, Elaine, put your cursor on that.
Oh, okay.
So basically, yeah, so what Councillor Blackman Wolf is saying, once that goes in, it will likely divert quite a bit of traffic away from Government Road, going into the business park, because they'll just go straight shoot down. And that's actually in the budget this year, which means it'll probably take about a year to be built, but that's,
Would there be room then between
There,
that
yes.
road and the mobile home park there to put a park?
yes, and I think that's
Okay.
something we can discuss. It could be a park, it could be some affordable housing in a park, it could be a variety.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please come up, state your name and street address.
Trustee Knight, 39754 Government Road, Unit Number 7. Just something that came to me as I was listening to the developers representative speak. Sorry, I forgot your name. Sabrina. When you were talking about how your units weren't meeting the current zoning bylaw threshold of 0.8 for floor area ratio, and you were used to building to floor area ratio, and yes, there's been a lot of concern expressed here about density, and maybe you could come back up and make sure folks understand the difference, because to me, you're not comparing apples and apples. You don't get more floor area ratio and necessarily get more units, or the other way around. So it can be a little bit confusing to say, yeah, we're actually not even building to your maximum allowable floor area ratio. Shouldn't that be a good thing? But you're actually just building smaller units, but you're building more of them. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood you can't make a direct comparison between. I should be speaking to you guys. Sorry, because I'm trying to understand.
Yes, you can speak for me. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Because I'm working on my head. You can't necessarily equate floor area ratio and number of units as if they're even. Like. Correct.
So it is a tough thing because people understand a unit is a unit is a unit. A unit might be 2,000 square feet, a unit might be 600 square feet. And there's different give and takes with both those sizes of units. It would be interesting to understand what existing floor area ratio of the other townhome developments in the area, so people get a concept, because 0.6 may be the equivalent of what's on Edgewater Crescent. I don't know, 100%, because it's not they're much bigger units, right, per se.
Yeah.
So it is a tough concept for all of us, us that deal with it all the time, to get their brain around, because zoning is not necessarily units, it is footprint, if you want to call it that.
Right. So that was my, just as she made that, maybe she can come up at a later date or later tonight and speak a little more to how to get my head around that. And I'm probably not the only one who needs to get their head around that.
I can't force Ms. Golly to come up, but if she wants to consider about it and talk.
Thank you, Rob.
So by way of example, if we look at the current site plan, all of those pink ones, there's a one-level 600 square foot unit in all of them, so 14 total. So if I said, okay, I'm going to combine my 600 square foot units into one 1,200 square foot units, I'm then removing 7 units from the total unit count. But the footprint remains the same. I'm still at a 0.61 FAR. So I'm still occupying as much as the lot as I was previously, but the unit count comes down. So the impact, what I'm understanding from a unit count basis, is that it impacts traffic and it impacts parking. And I think that's the real concern around unit count versus FAR. Again, I'm just interpreting information here. From what I'm understanding, the footprint doesn't look onerous to anyone. It's just that unit count. So if we can address the issues around traffic and address the issues around parking, I think everyone's satisfied, but again, I'm just interpreting here. Did that make sense? A little bit of sense of the difference?
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I should turn this completely this way. Yes? Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Please come up and state your name and your street address. And let me know if you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Michael Hutchison, 3210 Manhorn Road, Squamish. I represent myself, and you know, I'm also a developer, and I have developed in this site. I also echo the words that Sabrina said. I think it's been a very respectful public hearing, and I really appreciate that, honestly. As a developer, I've been in these meetings when they're not so respectful, and I think a respectful dialogue is quite helpful. And I also thought Sabrina's presentation was excellent. You know, I think she did address concerns. And I only really stand up to speak to say that I have developed in this situation before, where you have a need for smaller units and a desire for density, and yet you've got a cramped site. And there is potentially a suggestion that I have that might help. In Amblepath, when we were asked to put up an apartment in quite a tight site, we put the parking underground, and so therefore the roads are underground as well. And because the site has to be raised 2 or 3 meters, I'm going to guess, for the FCL, putting an underground parking, although it's more expensive normally, if you've got to fill and compact that fill, there is a lessening of the cost, somewhere around 35 to 40% of what you would otherwise pay. And if you look at the site as it is, and you imagine those roads replaced with green spaces and an underground parking under the buildings, you would have a much more attractive development. Slightly more expensive, but more attractive. And I know it's not a vernacular that we promote very much because, frankly, in North America we're addicted to cars, and perhaps that's our fault. But this site is also on perhaps the best bike path in Squamish. You know, Government Road, when you do that connector and you get cars off, that extra width the Government Road has is an excellent bike path. It's flat and it's close to the downtown. So they're my thoughts. Thank you. That's all. Give me time.
Thank you. And as Ms. Foley said, sort of a third of the site is underground parking on the staff townhomes. 2/3 isn't. Question to staff. I suspect fire would need access to the site anyway somehow, so I don't know if that's a consideration. We're getting a little off topic here, but something to think about if this moves forward at the development stage. I'm not sure how that would be. I will go to the public once again. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? I'm going to ask for a second time. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? I only asked 3 times, so if you do want to speak, I'm going to ask you now, is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no more hands, Council, are there any remaining questions at this point? Okay, I will declare this public hearing closed. Being there, now that the public hearing is closed, no further submissions can be made to Council. Council can choose to deliberate on 3rd reading tonight, or may defer the decision to the next meeting, but we'll let Council decide that down the agenda. Thank you very much. Moving on the agenda, we have consideration of 3rd reading for the development. Council, as I said, does not have to consider 3rd reading at this time. If it's the type of decision you think you need to deliberate on and ruminate on, we can decide this next week. However, it is Council's prerogative to move and deliberate on it today. Councilor Ray?
I was going to say tonight.
So you're moving it?
I'll move tonight.
Or are you moving the bylaw?
I'll move the bylaw.
Moving the bylaw. Is there a second? Moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Blackman-Wolf. Councilor Ray would like to speak to your motion.
Sure, thank you. Interesting. because we heard, as some of the speakers said, many of these arguments with respect to the breeze about density and so forth, and it is a bit of a difficult thing sometimes to wrap your head around, putting density dealing with FARs and not number of units. One of the advantages of having big units is, I guess, fewer people. You also have fewer parking spots and so forth. So there is a trade-off both ways, and it's also very much driven by the market. And that's just the economic reality of it. At some markets, larger units sell, and at other markets, smaller units sell, and developers have to make their business decisions with respect to these things. A couple of comments that came out. One is with respect to the lack of parks, and I don't think there's any debate about that in this area. I mean, one advantage, I think, is that it's relatively close to the dike, which is some recreational opportunity, but certainly is not the park where you take children to play necessarily, and that is certainly lacking in that area, and council has heard that and knows that, and I think is actively trying to figure out how we might fit a park into this area, but there are land ownership issues that we have to deal with. But I think you can rest assured that that is something that's certainly on our radar. The second is traffic, and I know it sounds hard to believe, but Government Road is, I think, our second largest artery in our community after the highway, and can actually take an awful lot of traffic. And so personally, I'm not concerned about that. There may be some tweaking to do, as one speaker suggested, by putting in crosswalks or something of that nature, and that's certainly open to do it. Parking in the neighborhood can be a concern, and that can be a total aggravation for people living in the neighborhood. But there are some techniques to deal with that. If you look around, for example, Vancouver, where you have resident parking only, for example, and there are things like that that will discourage, or can discourage, at least to some extent, parking throughout the neighborhood from people from other adjoining properties. So I look at this development as being densification, which is a trend that in this particular neighborhood we have long advocated as a district council, and it's consistent, as was noted, with other developments in the neighborhood. So the thing that does concern me about it was the privacy aspect, and initially when I was asking the questions at the start, I was thinking that maybe it would be appropriate to put forward a zoning bylaw with something like a 20-foot buffer at the back to retain existing vegetation. But I take the speaker's point that maybe that's not appropriate when you have to fill, as you do in this area, and that is the reality of it. Those trees may not survive at all. So I didn't put that into the motion that I made. I will say that I will be looking for significant vegetation along that back boundary in the development permit application. And I recognize that might be new vegetation, but I think it is a fair comment to say that there should be some landscaping buffer along that back edge as opposed to just the road. I appreciate the spatial thing the road provides, but it doesn't really do much visually. And so I would be looking for some form of, I'm speaking for myself, some form of landscaping buffer and hopefully screening along that back boundary to minimize the proximity between the two properties. But apart from that, that development to me is consistent with where we are going as a district. This is a neighborhood in transition. I wouldn't say that about every neighborhood in our community, but certainly this one is. And so I will be supporting third reading.
Thank you. I think Councillor Ray spoke really well too. I would agree with most of his sentiments. I do have concerns. I think it was Shoshana that spoke about not having connected neighborhoods. And when I look at the Ring Road and how our neighborhoods are developing in there, it is sort of privatizing all of our districts and making everything compound-like. And in the absence, you know, when we have three, I've thought a lot about this, and I just don't know how we prevent this with fire access and the Ring Road there. But it does make it like a compound, and we have all these named compounds in Squamish, and we're starting to speak of our neighborhoods in this way. And with no comprehensive planning and pathways between our neighborhoods, we end up with drive-in, drive-out, no accessibility, neighborhoods that are not, you know, they're not attractive community partners. It means that you have to drive somewhere to get to community, or you can gather in your backyard but you don't interact with your neighbors. So I really, the compoundness of our planning situation right now is concerning me, where we have developers buying up small lots and we have no comprehensive connectivity between our neighborhoods. And it does affect how your communities interact with each other. And it forces people into cars to get to places like either parks or community amenities. So I am in support of density along Government Road because it is our connected thing. And I'm looking for active transportation to be, we can have nothing but active transportation, more buses along this route, more bike, and a separated bike lane from one end to the other so that our kids can get, so that we don't have to worry about our kids getting from one end of town to the other, and they have one safe way, so that right next to the sidewalk is a protected bike lane. And where the way we're designing it now is that we're forcing traffic up against the sidewalks with the bus routes. We're not really designing for a protected bike lane against the sidewalk with cutouts and proper road amenities. And we're looking at these compounds with ring roads around them for fire access. So I also support the 600 square foot units. I don't want to lose sight of the affordability aspect of this. It really, although less units doesn't necessarily mean less density, it still means the same amount of cars, and people that tend to have 600 square foot units have less cars, not more cars. And there's adequate parking for all of those units, so I'd like to maintain the 600 square foot unit affordability aspect of this project. So yeah, the comments that I have are general. I support the density change. I am going to be looking for shrubbery as well, and more across the back ledge as well. And then I also, as far as a comment to planning and community and our OCP, we really have to start looking at how we connect our developments, because it's not acceptable to continue taking single-family homes and just plopping unit developments along and not having connectivity between them and forcing everybody into their cars. So that's long-term planning. That's our issue, not the developer's issue. And yeah, I look forward to the DP when we can have more discussions about pathways and connectivity.
Sorry, Wayne, this is third reading.
Okay.
Councillor Kent.
Yeah, I support third reading on this. I'm looking forward to seeing the DP and what it'll bring as far as addressing the open spaces and some of the variances in height and parking. So I still want to see those addressed. I was glad to hear the developer say she's still open to suggestion and that this is still a rough plan and that there's some room for flexibility. So we'll be looking for to push those boundaries a little bit.
Councillor English.
I'll support third reading of this rezoning, but I still have quite a few concerns. Not only listening to the people that spoke tonight, but just thinking about our multifamily developments, and I think so much now our development looks at ticking boxes in our policy. So instead of looking at quality and the livability of our higher density developments, I think this development is more dense than the rest of the neighborhood. So I don't think it's in line with some of our OCP policies in that regard. You know, the 17.5 is, will encourage greater density in locations near commercial nodes and near transit routes. So this is on a transit route, but it's not a walkable neighborhood. If you want to put small units where people tend not to have cars, they should be downtown, or they should be near Garibaldi. They don't belong in the North Yards, where people have to get in a car to get their shopping done, to get to the doctors. This isn't a walkable neighborhood. It is still a car-based neighborhood. And so that's why medium density works here, because we do have some buses, we do have a bike lane, but people still need their cars here to get where they want to go. So I still think that the variances that are being requested are not offset by a community amenity or a benefit. Today, we're being offered some rental space, but it's market rental. It's not even affordable rental, so what we're desperate for is rental market in the $900 to $600 range. That's not what's being offered, it's whatever the market will bear. So we're not even getting subsidized rental or rental, you know, that's matched to people's incomes. And so I have a lot of concerns when this comes forward to the development permit stage, that we're not building quality, livable density. We're ticking boxes. And, you know, sure, we can look for screening at the back, but I don't think the residents are talking about shrubs and hedges. They're talking about things that'll be 2 stories high and keep them from looking across. These are townhomes, not single, you know, 1-level homes. They're tall, and that's what people are asking for, is trying to protect some of that screen so they're not looking into each other's bedrooms. So I have a lot of concerns still with what's being proposed at the development permit, but I will support rezoning the property.
Thank you. Generally agree with what's been said. In an ideal world, and perhaps maybe there's some ability for the Breeze development and this development to coordinate a bit more, these lots would have been assembled in a more comprehensive plan, and perhaps less asphalt roadway would have been achieved, and something that makes a little bit more sense while retaining some of the density. I think the size of the units is great. I like the smaller units along the transit corridor. It's not a walkable neighborhood today, but I think our goal is to make it walkable in the future. Once we start creating the density, we will never create the need for the commercial and the walkability aspects of the neighborhood. Agreed that I think some work needs to be done prior to DP and consideration, particularly of the variances within the DP. So we'll see what comes back to us when that is in front of us.
Yeah, I'm generally seeing this as going in the right direction. There was, from the discussion earlier today, it seems like there's some quick modifications that could happen. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure, I'm seeing, is it the case that there's going to be access for pedestrians to get out the back of the lot there, or is that encumbered by the surrounding properties?
Mayor Heinzman, through you, yes, through the proponent is offering basically 4 pedestrian access right-of-ways, so 2 line up with pedestrian right-of-ways that have already been secured on the Breeze project. In addition, there is 1 to the north that lines up with a green space on the Edgewater development, and there is also 1 in the northeast corner.
Yeah, and that's great, because I think that is a very significant change. In most other projects, you see that these would have fencing all around them, and a person would not be able, they'd have to walk all the way around just to get there, and that by its own nature made it less desirable to walk, so I think that's good, and I'm excited about the potential for the commercial space that was included in the Breeze project, which I think will put this neighborhood on its way to becoming a fully integrated, walkable community. So I think that is good, and I know also that it is council's intention to beef up the transit service on this core transit corridor, and my personal objective would be for us to see during the day service every 10 minutes, so that it's quite feasible for people to choose transit instead of their cars.
And just one more item on the community amendment contribution. There's a significant amount going to affordable housing, but also a good chunk that should go to a community amendment, and I agree it should go to ideally a park or something that is for this neighborhood. So we'll make sure we look at that as we're planning the whole neighborhood and taking those funds and putting it back into the neighborhood in terms of ideally a community park.
Is there any way that we can protect some of those standing trees, at least during the DP stage, to try and consider their preservation?
I guess that's a question to you.
We would have to do that through a covenant. at the rezoning stage. Unless it could be tied to a variance at the DP stage. That's the only discretion then.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, I want to encourage the developer to think about the feedback that they got from the community tonight and the desire for privacy, and if there is a way to look again at the layout with staff to try and preserve some of that natural privacy. I get in the environmental report that they're not necessarily tremendously high value environmental, but they provide a lot of, neighborly, it creates a neighborhood, it creates a sense of place to have some of those big trees. And as one of the speakers said tonight, it's about hearing the birds in your backyard and seeing the eagles perched on top of those trees, and that's something that makes where they live special to them. And so I'm just wondering if we can, look at that through the DP process. 'Cause I don't want to create a safety hazard by preserving those trees that are covenant, but I also want to listen to the community's concerns about trying to protect those while we go through the development permit process. I just wonder if there's a way that we can do that without putting a covenant on it.
It's an interesting thing, and it's happened before. Everyone's concerned about making sure other people's property are providing privacy for them. Interestingly, I'm sure the developments in the area provided a whole ton of privacy to previously developed developments. And so it's the challenging thing. For me, it's not about a privacy issue, but there is an environmental sort of a quality of neighborhood issue with trees. But it's always interesting, people on their property don't have any trees, but they want the neighbor to keep their trees. I get the sentiment, but I also don't understand the sort of the fairness or rationale in it. However, I do believe that there's habitat value and quality of life and esoteric value to the trees. I'm just not sure how we preserve it on this particular site. And we have site alteration permits, that's what they would have to do to take it down unless we cut it.
So, I mean, we have trees on our property, but they were all planted 10 years ago, so they're small. One day they'll be big. And so the value is that these trees are already big. And so they provide environmental benefit, a social benefit, they have value. And, I couldn't confidently put forward an amendment to the bylaw tonight that says protect, this much of a setback here or that sort of thing. So I don't want to hamstring the developer and looking at their plan again and seeing if there's a way to do that. So that's my question to staff.
Well, it sounds, by looking at the conceptual site plan at this stage, that there will be definitely an opportunity for some discretion at the next stage. And it also sounds like the developer is very open to listening to what the community has said and maybe redesigning the back of that property to maybe enhance it with new vegetation, or save the vegetation that's there. But it is a huge challenge to save that vegetation because of the flood implications to the new development. So it doesn't just set back the buildings, it's setbacks where you can start filling in order for those trees to survive. But I think that message has been heard tonight, and I expect that will be incorporated in the next phase, the addressing of privacy.
I hear a motion.
There's a massive green space in the middle. Could it be possible to plant, to do some more, if it's environmental, to plant some trees in the center, so that it's more of a wooded area instead of an open area? And I know it would take time, but if it's habitat and environment that you're worried about, I do see the value of having trees in the neighborhood.
And that's what we consider
Yeah,
through
that'd
the
be
development. Can you just put your cursor on the approximate location, particularly the citizens groups, just trying to understand?
Sorry, of where the Sitka spruce is? It's in this rough area here.
Okay, I see no more hands. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We're now on staff reports, community planning infrastructure, DP number 429, Sirocco 38050 Lost Lane.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Asia Philp, planner with the Community Planning Development. For your consideration tonight is Development Permit 429 for Sirocco. It's a mixed-use project which, if approved, would permit the development of 138 apartment units, up to 27 residential float homes, 4 floating commercial units, and 5,600 square feet of commercial space. The property is located in the downtown core along the Mampang Blind Channel. It's adjacent to Loggers Lane. The land lot is 2.4 acres. The water lot is 1.3 acres for a total site area of 3.7 acres. To the north is a Mistral development, zone CD54. To the south is Woonay Park, zone P3. To the east is the Mampang Blind Channel, zoned I3. And to the west is, first off, the deactivated rail line, Loggers Lane, and then beyond that is the Cleveland Avenue commercial businesses. The subject property is designated as downtown in the official community plan. It was rezoned from general industrial I3 to a comprehensive development zone CD87 on December 6, 2016. The property is subject to development permit area 4 guidelines, which were amended in October of 2016 to add in environmental protection and downtown neighborhood plan guidelines. And the property is located within a flood hazard area. The mixed-use residential and commercial development is proposed for the land lot. This includes 3 buildings comprised of residential apartments and commercial spaces. The buildings would sit on an at-grade parkade. The parkade is accessed via Winnipeg and Victoria street ends. The parking requirements of the zoning bylaw have been met, and there's an excess of 40 spaces provided. The proposal incorporates a significant amount of public space. This includes a waterfront walkway along the dike, which would connect from Woonay Park to the Mistral Development's proportion of the walkway to the north. The proposal also includes publicly accessible courtyard spaces between the buildings. There's pedestrian access from Loggers Lane to the waterfront walkway provided between the buildings and also from the Winnipeg and Victoria street ends. There's 3 lookout piers off the waterfront walkway, as well as 2 public docks. All of the docks, including the ones for the float home access, are proposed to be publicly accessible. A public art installation is proposed for the Victoria street end, and interpretive signage is proposed along the length of the waterfront walkway, and this will recognize the rich history of this site. Each of the 3 mixed-use buildings would contain 46 apartments and 1,870 square feet of commercial floor space. The proposed height is 20 meters, or 66 feet. The commercial units face onto the waterfront walkway in the Mampang Blind Channel, and these will activate the public spaces along the waterfront. There's large outdoor patio spaces that are provided in front of each of the commercial units, and this will further activate the public spaces. The concrete parkade walls will be visually screened along Loggers Lane using green screens. These consist of climbing vines, and then shrubs are planted in front of that. The building faces are articulated on all sides to break the building up into smaller masses. Also, the uppermost story is stepped back to further reduce the mass of each building, and it features an angled roofline to provide some visual interest. The exterior materials palette is fairly simple. The color scheme is tones of gray, and this is highlighted with a simulated wood grain spandrel panel, and this will add some color and warmth to the development. The aesthetic quality of the buildings represents a contemporary simple design, and this is becoming a popular Squamish vernacular. DPA 4 guidelines speak to preserving the easterly views from Cleveland Avenue by framing and maximizing these views. Staff requested a view analysis as part of the rezoning and the development permit process. On the left side is the view perspective from Cleveland Avenue, looking east towards the Chief down Winnipeg Street. And then on the right is the view perspective from Cleveland Avenue, looking east down Victoria Street. So the applicant has provided a couple renderings of the proposed development. This first one shows the waterfront walkway and the dike edge that interfaces with the float home portion of the development. The walkway is divided into a 3.6 meter wide asphalt bikeway and a 2.4 meter concrete pedestrian path, and it's lined on either side with habitat plantings that are incorporating native shoreline vegetation and some logs and rocks. This second rendering provides a bird's eye view of the most northerly of the three proposed buildings. It shows the waterfront walkway connection to the Winnipeg Street end, and also there's a play area in front of Building 1 and one of the community courtyards, which is between Building 1 and 2. The landscape design provides ample green spaces, and it connects these spaces to the waterfront walkway. The green spaces around the building and west of the waterfront walkway are fully accessible to the public, and they provide for both passive and active outdoor recreation opportunities. Each of the three main open spaces offers a different play option. In front of Building 1, there's a natural play area. In front of Building 2, there's a bermed lawn area that features mounds or hills. And then in front of Building 3 is a flat open lawn area. Benches, picnic tables, and other informal seating are provided throughout the development and also along the waterfront walkway. The applicant has provided the following examples of conceptual design elements that they would like to incorporate at the detailed design stage. Staff will work with the applicant to ensure that the streetscape furnishings, the light fixtures, and other detailed design elements are of high quality and appropriate for the location and the context. The proposal generally meets Development Permit Area 4 form and character guidelines. The proposal was reviewed by our advisory design panel on November 3rd, 2016. The advisory design panel supported the project in general and requested that the applicant work with staff to resolve recommendations made by the panel. The applicant made the following changes to address the ADP's comments. They added more green space, trees, and landscaping to enhance the public spaces, and also to provide more privacy for the individual ground floor units. They added a bike wash station, accessible street furniture, and a fully conceptualized lighting plan. And they also delineated the bikeway and the pedestrian walkway, so they separated the two. The development is proposed to occur over 4 phases, as shown here. Installation of the public realm improvements would be phased in section by section for each phase, and they would have to, each of the public realm improvements would need to be completed prior to occupancy of each phase. Compliance with the environmental protection guidelines in Development Permit Area 4 will be confirmed when the detailed design of the dike, the public piers, ramps, and the docks are submitted, and this will also occur in a phased manner. DP 429 was listed on the online development showcase, and the development information sign was posted on the site as per our communications policy. No public comments were submitted specifically for the development permit application. So given that the proposal conforms with the form and character of Development Permit Area 4, staff recommend council authorize Development Permit 429 with the following conditions. Submission of a landscape cost estimate and security bond, a grading plan, submission of detailed designs for the dike and for phase 1, submission of the detailed design for the lighting as well as the streetscape furnishings, And lastly, submission of a conceptual design for the proposed historical interpretive signage and for the public art installation at the Victoria Street Road end. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks.
Councilor, any questions? Councilor Garcia.
So this is just for phase one. Do you anticipate a separate DP for each of the following phases?
No, this is to cover all of the complete development.
It only refers to phase one pier and dock.
Yeah, so within the development permit itself is the requirements for the phases 2 through 4 submission of the detailed designs.
The next question is with respect to the walkway adjacent to the float homes between the two docks. Is that a DP requirement that it be public, or was that a zoning requirement?
That was a zoning requirement.
Zoning?
Yes.
Councilor Reese?
No, sorry, thanks, I'm fine.
Councilor Lee?
Could you just go back to the slide that has the conditions?
Yeah.
So in our report, a lot of the Malcolm Blind Channel environmental best management practices guidelines are to be determined. And I'm wondering where that's captured in the conditions of the development permit. Because most of them are to be determined. I get that that all needs to be designed, but is that number 4?
Mayor Heinzman, through you, capturing all of the environmental recommendations that are in both the DP guidelines as well as the bioinventory that was done is all within the DP, the permit itself. So the conditions are in the permit. So just to provide some further clarification, the conditions listed here are those that would be required prior to the DP being issued. But then within the permit itself is the full list of conditions that the developer must develop to.
Does that make sense to you, Councilor Lee? Any other questions for staff? Councilor Chappelle?
With all the public space, was the commercial footprint kept the same?
Yes.
I like
Anybody else? You want to put a motion forward?
Move it.
Moved by Councilor Reese, seconded by Councilor Ken. Councilor Reese, would you like to speak to it?
Sure. No, I stated at zoning, I like this development. I like the way it's been kind of set up and the view corridors particularly, and the drawings, the conceptual drawings we've seen, I think will be certainly a great asset to our waterfront, and so I'm looking forward to seeing them built out. I think it provides some wonderful public space in addition to nice places for some lucky people to live, so I'm supporting this motion.
Anyone else would like to speak to it? Briefly, generally echo Councilor Reese's comments. Looking forward to some of the details on the float homes coming to life, realization. Look forward to seeing that. And congratulations on a very well thought out plan. Anybody else? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, we have financial services going approval for spring 2017 municipal finance 30 debt issue. Considering we've been in this room for 10 hours.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. Christine Matthews, Chief Financial Officer. We have before you a request for municipal servicing, municipal security issuing resolutions to be able to borrow $599,883. We have to go through the Squamish Lillooet Regional District, as Council is aware. And we have to get these resolutions over to them ASAP in order to make their meeting this month in order to meet the spring borrowing. So there is a sense of urgency to this one. You will notice that we are doing some quite a bit of piecemeal borrowing here. This is trying to clean up. We've been discussing with council how we're trying to change our borrowing policies. This is left over from basically 2014 to 2016 for past borrowing bylaws. This bylaw is nearing, these 3 bylaws are nearing expiry, so we have to get the municipal servicing resolution in place before they expire.
Any questions for staff? Looking for someone to move this. Moved by Councillor Blackenhole, second by Councillor... Sorry. Councillor Kent. A call question. All those in favor? You had like some sort of fluffy thing. Awesome, I love that question. Okay, that is moved and seconded and approved. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Blackenhole, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.